Welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary. We continue to bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and giving glory to our Creator while doing it. The Bible does not say, "Have this mindlessness among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus." No, rather, God gave you an intelligently designed brain for a reason. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, you can just punch in wazulu.com or genesisweek.com and you can find us. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get extras like Crevo Rants and full interviews with our guests. I'm your host, Ian Juby. There were several reports of noteworthy dinosaur finds that came out this past week, two of which were especially interesting to the origins debate. What was called a 1 in a billion dinosaur find, an ankylosaurus from the tar sands of Alberta found in 2011, and an ichthyosaur found in Iraq. Yeah, I know. I realize an ichthyosaur is technically not a dinosaur, but it is loosely called a marine dinosaur. Now, in both cases, the fossils were found in the wrong place. What does that mean, the wrong place? Wrong place according to what? Well, the wrong place only according to deep time and evolutionism. For example, the ankylosaur was a spectacular find in an area where only marine reptiles were found, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, and the like. In fact, the area of the tar sands is assumed to be deposits from an ancient sea. So what is a land dinosaur doing buried in what is assumed to be a sea floor? Now, this fossil is not out of place at all if one believes these fossils were buried during a worldwide flood. As we've previously discussed in this show and in Crevo Rant number 17, Dinosaurs and Asteroids, the land dinosaurs are persistently found in water-deposited sediments along with marine creatures like fishes, clams, turtles, etc. Now, these formations are huge, provincial in size, and weren't laid down by some meandering river. It all makes complete sense within the context of a worldwide flood. The fossil ichthyosaur found in Iraq was deemed to be in the wrong place according to geological time. In fact, the Latin name assigned to this particular fossil is an illusion of its out-of-place position, called Melowania anachronis, which means out-of-time swimmer. Now, in this particular case, from an evolutionary deep time perspective, the fossil wasn't that far out of place. I mean, it was found in the early Cretaceous instead of the Jurassic. But this brings us back to the question of order in the fossil record. Now, we have all seen the wonderful geologic column charts like this in school, showing the gradual evolutionary progression from allegedly older rock layers at the bottom through to the younger layers at the top. This geologic column and the alleged fossil sequence are both fiction. They do not exist. Now, I've had the privilege of seeing this more and more for myself personally as I studied the rock record. Let's take a look at some examples of living fossils and look at them through the glasses of evolutionary time, which I personally don't believe, but let's go with it for the present study. The coelacanth, for example, first appears in the fossil record some 450 million years ago and vanishes from the fossil record 70 million years ago. It was assumed to be extinct until a school of them were discovered off the coast of South Africa in the 1930s. So the rock record is claimed to be a record of evolutionary change and ascent. For example, we know that fishes evolved into land creatures because the fishes appear first in the older rock layers, then the four-footed land creatures, known as the tetrapods, appeared in the upper rock layers. The tetrapods do not appear in older rock layers because they had not yet evolved, or so the claim goes. But watch carefully. Even though there are many evolutionary assumptions involved here, which you are about to see are just plain false, we're going to assume that the assumptions are correct. Now, using the evolutionary assumptions, the coelacanth first appears in the rock record 450 million years ago. It's found scattered throughout these rocks, but isn't found in any rocks younger than 70 million years old, according to evolution. But the fish is still around today. Obviously, the fish was around during the last 70 million years that all of these rock layers were being formed. Obviously, the fish just simply was not preserved in the rock record during that time. So, we can clearly conclude then, even using the evolutionary assumptions, that absence of the fish from the rocks does not mean the creature was absent completely. So what about the allegedly older rock layers then? Was the coelacanth around then? The Wollemi pine is another classic example, a tree first appearing in the fossil record 200 million years ago and vanishing from the fossil record some 34 million years ago on the evolutionary timescale. Again, thought to be extinct until a grove of them were found growing in a canyon in Australia in 1994. Now, it's still alive today, so obviously it was around while the last 34 million years of rock record was being laid down. It just simply was not preserved in the rock record. Therefore, because we know it was around when these rock layers were being formed and it wasn't preserved, then obviously we cannot say that it was not around before the 200 million years ago. Now, there are many, many examples like this that I can provide of living fossils still around today that are absent from parts of the rock record. This nullifies the whole idea that the rock record represents the organisms around at the time that the sediments were laid down, because we have multiple examples where we know the organism was there, but not preserved in the rocks. So let's back up to the supposed evolution of the tetrapods to further bring home this point. There have been no body fossils of tetrapods found in rocks older than, say, 365 million years. This was touted, sometimes very loudly and confidently, as evidence for evolution. We could watch the evolution and appearance of the tetrapods in the fossil record. But this interpretation relies on the assumption that if it doesn't appear in the rock record, it wasn't there at all. And as we just demonstrated, that assumption is patently false. To drive the point further home, in 2010, fossil footprints from a tetrapod were found in Poland in allegedly 395 million-year-old rock. Well, obviously, if we have footprints, then this creature had fully formed feet, ankles, hips, toes, etc. This was a fully formed tetrapod, which completely nullified the alleged evolution of the tetrapods because it predated all of its supposed half-fish, half-tetrapod ancestors. You can't be your grandfather's father. Thus, this entire alleged fossil sequence, demonstrating evolution, has been shown to be false. This fossil sequence, even if it were an actual representation of the fossil order, would not be a reflection of time and evolution because organisms came and went without being preserved in the fossil record. These lessons can also be applied to the alleged hominid evolution of ape to man. After all, if completely modern humans were found in rocks older than our ancient ape-like ancestor, obviously you can't be your grandfather's father, so evolution has been falsified. Now, it's interesting to note that this falsification has already happened multiple times, as we have shown in previous episodes of Genesis Week. For example, in 2011, further studies of the Laetoli fossil footprints once again showed them to be from completely modern humans and rocks that were allegedly the age of our pre-human ape-like ancestors. But leaving aside the many times the fossil record has falsified evolutionism, what I want to focus on here is the alleged sequence of fossils. The rule of thumb when it comes to geological deposits is that usually most of the alleged geologic column is missing. that means that the fossils are missing from the sequence as well. So, just going by the general rule of thumb, we see that the alleged fossil sequence just plain doesn't exist. The fossils are typically found out of the evolutionary order or are missing completely. My own personal journey was that I suspected this was true. It was not until I started conducting my own field research in the various fossil beds throughout North America that I found out my suspicions were even more true than I had originally thought. The fossil sequence demanded by evolutionism doesn't even exist at all. Now, while it's true there is a general sorting of specific fossils in specific layers, the alleged evolutionary order does not exist. For example, when we dig in the Jurassic dinosaur bone beds of the Morrison Formation, we find the dinosaurs buried with clams, calamites from the Carboniferous period, fish, turtles, insects, mammals, and worms. When we dig in the Cretaceous layers, we find the dinosaurs buried with clams, calamites and lepidodendron from the Carboniferous period, fishes, turtles, insects, mammals, and worms. We see a jumbled mix of organisms and environments. Plants, land animals, sea animals, insects, all mixed together in a watery catastrophe. The organisms are found in multiple time zones of the geologic column. The fossil non-sequence has even been acknowledged by a few knowledgeable and brave evolutionary experts, such as David Raup from the Chicago Field Museum and professor of geology at the University of Chicago. A large number of well-trained scientists outside of evolutionary biology and paleontology have unfortunately gotten the idea that the fossil record is far more Darwinian than it is. This probably comes from the oversimplification inevitable in secondary sources, low-level textbooks, semi-popular articles, and so on. Also, there is probably some wishful thinking involved. In the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find predictable progressions. In general, these have not been found, yet the optimism has died hard, and some pure fantasy has crept into the textbooks. So what we see when we look at the actual fossil and rock record itself is that there is no evolutionary sequence. There is no order or time to the geological record. The ages assigned are given based on evolutionary thinking, and in particular the evolutionary ages assigned to the fossils. Well, if there is no evolutionary fossil sequence, then you have no foundational fossil evidence for evolution. But what we do see in the fossil record is stasis and extinction, neither of which is a help to evolutionism and is explained easily within the context of a young Earth creation and a worldwide flood which killed so many life forms. Evolution is the faith for which the facts have failed, while creation is the faith which fits the facts.